Rihanna had barely touched the pen when her sister smiled across the polished boardroom table and said, loud enough for every executive to hear, "Take your time. You'll be reporting to me after today." A few uncomfortable chuckles rippled through the room. Vanessa Brooks leaned back in her chair as if the company already belonged to her. "You'll have to get used to the new structure," she continued. "I'm making several leadership changes first thing Monday." She slid a fresh employee handbook across the table until it stopped in front of Rihanna. "You should read this," she said. "There are new reporting procedures." Their father laughed proudly. "That's exactly the confidence this company needs." No one corrected him. Not the attorneys. Not the board. Not the senior managers who had watched the business struggle for years. Several employees lowered their eyes toward the conference table, unable to hide how uncomfortable they looked. Vanessa folded her hands and delivered the sentence she had clearly rehearsed. "I'm in charge now." She looked directly at her younger sister. "You work for me." Rihanna didn't react. She simply turned one page in the folder before her, looked at the lead attorney, and said politely, "Thank you for preparing everything." The attorney gave the smallest nod. It lasted barely a second. No one else seemed to notice. Vanessa mistook Rihanna's silence for surrender. She smiled even wider. What nobody in that room understood was that Rihanna wasn't staying quiet because she'd lost. She was waiting for the meeting to officially begin. The conference room overlooked the city skyline that had once symbolized everything the Brooks family had built. 25 years earlier, their father had started the manufacturing company in a rented warehouse with fewer than a dozen employees. Over time, it had grown into a respected regional business, but the last several years had nearly destroyed it. Shrinking contracts, rising costs, debt that became harder to manage every quarter. The company had survived long enough to reach one final transition meeting, the signing everyone believed would determine its future. Around the table sat board members, outside accountants, corporate attorneys, senior department heads, and several longtime investors. Everyone expected to witness Vanessa Brooks become the company's next chief executive. Their retired father couldn't have looked prouder. "I've always known Vanessa was born to lead this company," he announced while greeting the directors. "She's carried this place through its toughest years." Rihanna said nothing. She had learned long ago that arguing with either of them never changed their minds. Instead, she quietly reviewed the stack of legal documents placed before her. Across the room, two operations managers exchanged sympathetic glances. They knew how many late nights Rihanna had spent helping stabilize the business, yet neither dared challenge the family's public narrative. Vanessa controlled daily operations, and everyone understood what happened to employees who embarrassed her. Vanessa noticed the silence and mistook it for admiration. "I appreciate everyone's confidence," she said as she adjusted the nameplate in front of her seat. "Once today's paperwork is finished, we'll finally be moving forward under clear leadership." Several department heads forced polite smiles. One investor remained expressionless. The lead attorney stood and organized the signature folders. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, "if everyone is ready, we'll begin the signing." Rihanna calmly picked up her pen. Vanessa leaned back, completely certain the next hour would end with her officially in control. She had no idea the meeting wasn't about giving her power. It was about revealing who had possessed it all along. Why was Rihanna the only person in the room who looked completely at peace? 3 weeks earlier, the company looked nothing like it did on signing day. The confidence Vanessa projected in public disappeared the moment creditors started calling. Sales had finally stabilized, but years of poor decisions had left the company carrying obligations it could barely meet. Rihanna had returned home after building a successful career helping struggling companies recover. She hadn't come back for a title. She came because it was still her family's business. Every morning, she arrived before sunrise. Every evening, she was usually the last person to leave. While most executives focused on quarterly presentations, Rihanna sat with lenders, suppliers, accountants, and legal advisors. One afternoon, she spread financial reports across a conference table. "If we renegotiate these supplier contracts before the next payment cycle," she told the finance team, "we'll improve cash flow immediately." The chief financial officer nodded. "It'll buy us breathing room." Before anyone could continue, the conference room door opened. Vanessa walked in carrying a coffee. "What are we discussing?" "The supplier restructuring. the CFO answered. Vanessa barely glanced at the documents. I'll present the strategy during tomorrow's executive meeting. Rihanna looked up. I've already prepared. I know, Vanessa interrupted with a practiced smile. I'll simplify it for everyone. The next morning, Rihanna sat quietly near the end of the executive table. Vanessa stood beside the presentation screen. Our recovery strategy, she began confidently, focuses on renegotiating supplier agreements, reducing unnecessary expenses, and improving liquidity. Slide after slide reflected Rihanna's work. Every recommendation, every calculation, every timeline. Their father smiled proudly. Excellent thinking, Vanessa. She accepted the compliment without hesitation. Rihanna simply closed her notebook. Correcting them would accomplish nothing. The meeting ended with applause directed toward the wrong person. Days later, Rihanna crossed paths with several warehouse supervisors during a routine inspection. One of them hesitated before speaking. We know those ideas were yours. Another quickly added, people notice more than you think. Rihanna smiled politely. Then focus on keeping production moving. But she keeps taking credit. I know. Aren't you going to say something? Rihanna looked across the factory floor where dozens of employees were working. The company recovering matters more than my reputation. The supervisors exchanged uncertain looks. Most people would have fought. Rihanna kept working. Their father remained convinced Vanessa was carrying the business. During one family dinner, he raised his glass. I'm proud of the way you've stepped up, he told Vanessa. She smiled modestly. I'm just doing what needed to be done. He turned toward Rihanna. And thank you for helping your sister with the paperwork. Vanessa didn't correct him. Neither did anyone else. Rihanna quietly continued eating. Years of favoritism had taught her that arguing during family dinners only created louder misunderstandings. Late one evening, after nearly everyone had gone home, Rihanna reviewed revised financial projections with Michael, the company's finance manager. He closed the office door behind him. I should probably stay out of this, he said carefully. Rihanna looked up. What is it? Michael hesitated. Vanessa's been telling department heads she's already the next CEO. Rihanna remained silent. She says the signing is just a formality. He watched her expression, expecting disappointment. Instead, she asked only one question. Has everyone already made up their minds? Michael slowly nodded. I think they have. Rihanna closed the folder in front of her. Thank you for telling me. You don't seem surprised. I'm not. She gathered her papers and left the office without another word. That evening, just after sunset, her phone rang. The caller ID displayed a number she had been waiting to see. She answered. A calm voice spoke only 5 words. Everything has been finalized. Monday morning arrived with an energy that felt more like a celebration than a corporate meeting. Senior managers filled the executive boardroom long before the scheduled start time. Outside counsel arranged binders on the polished conference table, while accountants verified signatures and board members greeted one another. Vanessa entered last. She walked in with the confidence of someone who believed the outcome had already been decided. Good morning, everyone, she announced. I hope you all had a relaxing weekend. Monday's going to be busy. Several department heads stood to shake her hand. Congratulations, one marketing director said. Thank you, Vanessa replied with a gracious smile. There's a lot of work ahead. Their father couldn't hide his pride. I've waited years for this day. So have I, Vanessa answered. Across the room, Rihanna quietly reviewed the documents in front of her. She acknowledged people politely, but never joined the conversations about the company's future. Most assumed she already knew where she stood. Vanessa certainly did. Before the attorneys officially opened the meeting, Vanessa decided to address the room herself. I'd like everyone to know a few changes will take effect immediately. Several managers reached for notepads. Starting Monday, all department heads will report directly to me. We'll also be restructuring senior leadership over the next 60 days. Nobody interrupted. She continued, as though the announcement had already been approved. I expect weekly performance reports from every division. The operations director nodded. Understood. So do I, said the sales manager. Vanessa smiled. Excellent. She turned toward Rihanna. I'll need you to stay after the meeting. Rihanna looked up. For what? I'll explain your responsibilities under the new structure. A few executives shifted awkwardly in their seats. One HR manager looked down at her notes rather than meet Rihanna's eyes. Still, nobody challenged Vanessa. Their father leaned forward. This is exactly the decisive leadership the company needs. Vanessa accepted the praise with another confident smile. I appreciate everyone's support. She looked around the table. I won't let any of you down. Several people applauded politely. Others clapped simply because everyone else did. Rihanna remained perfectly still. The board chairman cleared his throat. If everyone is settled, let's begin. The lead attorney stood. We'll follow the agenda approved by the board. Vanessa nodded confidently. Let's make it official. Instead of handing the first signature page to Vanessa, the attorney walked around the table and placed a thick folder in front of Rihanna. Ms. Brooks. Rihanna thanked him quietly. Vanessa laughed. I didn't realize assistants had so much paperwork. A few people smiled uncertainly. The attorney didn't respond. He simply pointed to several signature tabs. If you'll sign where indicated. Rihanna calmly signed the first page, then the second, then another. The documents were noticeably different from the employment packets stacked in front of everyone else. One board member leaned toward another. Those aren't executive contracts. The other director frowned. I noticed that. Across the table, the company's external auditor studied the documents with growing interest. He looked from the paperwork to Rihanna, then to the attorney. His expression changed. He suddenly understood exactly what was happening. Vanessa noticed none of it. She leaned back in her chair, amused. I hope they didn't overwhelm you with legal language. Rihanna simply continued signing. The room grew quieter with every page. People who had expected an ordinary executive appointment now sensed something unusual unfolding. The attorney collected the completed documents, carefully checked each signature, and looked toward the chairman. The chairman gave a slight nod. The attorney faced the room. Before executive appointments can proceed, he paused long enough for every conversation to stop. Ownership certification must first be confirmed. The smile slowly disappeared from Vanessa's face. Silence settled over the boardroom. Vanessa looked from the attorney to the chairman, then back again. I'm sorry, she said with a short laugh. Ownership certification? Why are we discussing that now? The attorney answered without changing his tone. Because executive appointments can only be approved by the current owner. Vanessa frowned. But today's meeting is to transfer leadership. The chairman shook his head. No. A few people exchanged confused glances. The ownership transition was completed previously, he said. Today's agenda concerns governance and executive appointments. Vanessa blinked. I don't understand. She turned toward their father. Dad? He looked just as confused. I was told today finalized everything. It does, the attorney replied. It finalizes the executive structure under the existing ownership. The distinction landed heavily in the room. Several directors opened the legal binders in front of them and began reviewing the first pages again. One investor adjusted his glasses and quietly reread the ownership schedule. Across the table, the external auditor folded his hands. He had stopped taking notes. Instead, he simply watched Vanessa. Vanessa leaned forward. There has to be some mistake. There is no mistake, the attorney replied. The ownership records were filed several weeks ago. Weeks ago? Correct. She looked around the room. Nobody mentioned that. The transaction was confidential until today's meeting. Their father stared at the documents. What transaction? The attorney opened the certified shareholder register, the acquisition of the company's controlling shares. Vanessa immediately turned toward Rihanna. You knew about this? Rihanna met her eyes. I did. And you didn't say anything? You never asked. The answer only made Vanessa more frustrated. This is ridiculous. She looked at the attorney again. Who approved this? The selling shareholders. She shook her head. No, I mean who authorized it. The board approved the transaction after completing due diligence. One director nodded. Unanimously. Another added quietly, it met every legal requirement. Vanessa looked from one face to another. For the first time that morning, nobody looked eager to agree with her. The confidence she had carried into the room began slipping away. But who bought the shares? Nobody answered immediately. Instead, the attorney placed one final document on the table. It was the certified shareholder record. He turned it toward Vanessa. Please review page 1. She grabbed the document. Her eyes scanned the first paragraph, then the ownership schedule, then the signature page. Her expression changed. No. She flipped another page, then another. This can't be right. Around the table, pieces that had never seemed connected suddenly fell into place. One board member leaned back. So that's why she attended every creditor negotiation. Another nodded. And every investor meeting. The CFO quietly added, she insisted on reviewing every financing agreement herself. The operations director spoke almost to himself. I thought she was helping with paperwork. The external auditor finally smiled. It was never paperwork. Their father slowly turned toward Rihanna. You handled those meetings? Rihanna answered calmly. Yes. The lender negotiations? Yes. The investor presentations? Yes. The refinancing package? Yes. Every short answer made the room quieter. Michael, the finance manager, remembered the endless evenings Rihanna spent reviewing financial models after everyone else had gone home. The warehouse supervisors remembered her walking production lines before sunrise. The suppliers remembered that every difficult negotiation had been handled by one person, not Vanessa. Rihanna. Sell. Vanessa lowered the papers. Her voice had lost every trace of confidence. You let me believe. Rihanna answered gently. I let you speak. The room remained silent. Vanessa looked toward her father for support. He had none to offer. His attention stayed fixed on the ownership documents resting on the conference table. Before Vanessa could gather another argument, Rihanna slowly rose from her chair. She buttoned her jacket and looked first at the board, then directly at her sister. Before we continue, she said evenly, there's one employment matter to address. No one spoke. The boardroom, which had been filled with quiet conversations only minutes earlier, now felt completely still. The lead attorney stood beside Rihanna. Ladies and gentlemen, he said, for the record, I'd like to summarize the completed transaction. He opened the final binder. 32 days ago, Ms. Rihanna Brooks completed the purchase of 100% of the company's controlling shares through a private investment group assembled for this acquisition. Several directors nodded. The transaction was unanimously approved by the selling shareholders. He turned another page. The board of directors ratified the acquisition after legal and financial due diligence. Another page. All regulatory filings were completed prior to today's meeting. He closed the binder. Today's meeting was never intended to determine ownership. He looked around the room. Ownership has already been legally established. His eyes settled on Rihanna. This meeting exists solely to approve the executive structure under the current owner. The truth landed all at once. Vanessa hadn't been walking into her promotion. She had been walking into someone else's board meeting. Vanessa looked around desperately. There has to be another explanation. No one answered. She turned toward the board chairman. You knew? Yes. The investors? Yes. The attorneys? Yes. She looked at the CFO. You knew too? He nodded once. We were legally required to keep the transaction confidential. She swallowed hard. And everyone just let me keep talking? The chairman answered quietly. No one wanted to interrupt the legal process. Vanessa lowered her eyes. Every confident announcement she'd made that morning replayed in her mind. I'm in charge now. You work for me. I'll explain your responsibilities. She suddenly realized every attorney, every director, every investor had heard every word knowing she was wrong. Their father slowly sat back in his chair. He looked at Rihanna as though seeing her for the first time. You bought the company? Yes. How? I spent 11 months rebuilding it. She spoke without anger. When I arrived, lenders were preparing to reduce our credit. She looked toward the finance team. We renegotiated every major obligation. The CFO nodded. We did. She continued. Suppliers were preparing to leave. The procurement director spoke next. She personally negotiated every long-term agreement. The investors? Rihanna smiled politely. I met every one of them. An investor across the table nodded. She convinced us this company was worth saving. Their father looked stunned. I thought Vanessa was leading those efforts. Rihanna didn't answer. She didn't need to. The silence said enough. One after another, people around the room began speaking. Michael, the finance manager, broke the silence first. She reviewed every financial model herself. The operations director followed. She visited every facility. The HR director added. She asked more questions about employees than executive bonuses. A warehouse manager who had been invited to the meeting spoke quietly. She knew workers by name. Another department head smiled. Whenever something went wrong, she solved it before anyone outside the company even knew. No one looked toward Vanessa anymore. Every conversation had shifted naturally toward the person who had actually carried the business through its hardest year. Rihanna looked at her sister. There was no anger in her voice, no satisfaction, only certainty. Vanessa. Her sister looked up. For months you represented work that wasn't yours. Vanessa tried to speak. I can explain. You repeatedly presented yourself as having authority you did not possess. She glanced briefly toward the HR director. You instructed employees based on a position you never legally held. Vanessa's shoulders dropped. Rihanna met her eyes. Then she delivered the 4 words that ended every assumption in the room. Your job ends today. No one gasped. No one applauded. The sentence didn't need volume. Its authority came from the truth behind it. The HR director quietly opened a prepared folder. I'll handle the separation process. An IT manager received a brief message and nodded. Within minutes, Vanessa's executive access was disabled. Her company credentials would stop working before she reached the parking lot. The board chairman addressed the room. This decision reflects governance, not family. Every director voted in favor of confirming Rihanna as chief executive officer. The vote was unanimous. The weeks that followed changed far more than the organizational chart. Employees who had spent years staying silent began sharing ideas openly. Performance reviews focused on measurable results instead of personal relationships. Promotions became transparent. Departments started working together instead of competing for favor. Suppliers renewed long-term contracts with confidence. Investors expanded their commitments after seeing stable leadership. Within months, the company reported its strongest financial performance in years. The family never fully recovered. Their father apologized to Rihanna more than once. I should have looked closer. She accepted his apology. But she couldn't pretend those years of favoritism had never happened. Trust wasn't rebuilt in a single conversation. It had to be earned, just like respect. Vanessa moved on to another company. They rarely spoke after that day. Not because Rihanna wanted revenge. Because some relationships change permanently once the truth is finally spoken aloud. Months later, Rihanna stood in the same boardroom where she'd once been handed an employee handbook as a joke. A new group of managers filled the seats. They weren't chosen because of their last names. They were there because they had earned the opportunity. Rihanna looked around the room before opening the meeting. We don't reward appearances here, she said. We reward responsibility. Heads nodded around the table. Outside the boardroom windows, employees crossed the courtyard below, beginning another ordinary workday. For them, the company had become something it hadn't been in years. Fair. Rihanna closed the meeting with the same quiet confidence she'd carried into that unforgettable signing day. She had never needed to tell people she was in charge. The truth had done that for her. Sometimes the loudest person in the room isn't the one in charge, just the last to realize who truly is.